And as you can see, we took the 2011-12 tax year, 2011-12 tax rates on full value. All the savings in the table that we just noted, we calculated what the levy would have been. And if 100% of those savings, in other words, all those staff positions were eliminated in the first year that we mentioned, and so forth, if that all happened in year one and 50% of the incentive operating aid were used, it would have resulted in a full value tax rate of $14.90. So, as you can see, the tax rate was $19.02 in Romulus, $15.72 in South Seneca. $14.90 would be a tax reduction with 50% of that incentive aid used. So then we tried to project out, and again, we made an assumption to do this, that using the figures that we've just shared, and we looked out over the 14 years after which a merged district would get incentive aid, and we assumed that the tax rate increased 2% a year. And again, we just made an assumption about that. Okay, we just specified that for projection's sake. We could debate that percentage. How long would it take for the two districts to get back to the rate that they were paying prior to the actual merger? And as you can see, what would happen in South Seneca, it would take about 4 years to get back to the rate at which it was really paying. And in Romulus, of course, starting at a much higher point, it would take, well, whatever number of years there, to get back to that, to pass the rate that it was actually paying. So, as you can see, there is a period of time when the additional aid, the savings, and everything will benefit both districts. Certainly, Romulus for a longer period of time than South Seneca. Now, I'm going to add to this that I know there has been some discussion about will merging the two districts fix the district's financial problems? The answer to that is no. It will not fix the district's financial problems. Looking into the out years, it certainly is going to help you as boards of education and future boards to deal with the situation from a much more comfortable position than you're currently able to deal with it, and likely will be able to deal with it in the next few years at least, if you don't merge, right? And of course, that's the purpose of the state's policy. So, in summary, I think let me conclude our recommendations, of course. As you can see, recommendation 20, we think that the new Board of Education certainly needs to scrutinize its initial budget, and of course the immediate ones after that, to ensure that the efficiencies that we've noted are actually realized. And again, most of those efficiencies are spelled out clearly in the report. And lastly, that the new Board of Education should come up with a financial plan to ensure the long-term benefit, to try to ensure these benefits go out in as far as many years as possible for the two districts. So this financial plan is critical, how best to use those monies. So with that, I guess Ellen and I will be more than glad to entertain questions from the board, and then I'm going to turn it over to, do you want to do this first, Naomi, and then, want to do it first? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Naomi Zuckerman, who's going to talk a little bit about the projections for both districts in terms of financial projections, and then we'll open it to questions.
Good evening. I changed the color of the slide, so hopefully we'll be able to keep you engaged as we go through my side of the presentation. I've been asked to give you kind of the round out. The merger is what's going forward. We wanted to give you some information about the districts and their financial conditions currently, or as we see them, as single districts. As usual, before a business administrator like myself, I'm Naomi Zuckerman, I'm the business administrator at South Seneca. Bob Boulware is the business administrator at Romulus. Unfortunately, he could not join us. He's with his daughter in Philadelphia, I believe. Very important support he's providing there, so I'm going to be speaking on behalf of both districts. Revenue. Sorry, as I was saying, as far as putting information out there, we're a little nervous about putting numbers in ink because anything can change. We all have budgets in our homes, whether we're determining whether we need to buy a new car, our taxes go up, our other obligations. It's constantly changing. Constantly changing. So a little caveats as we go through before I show some actual numbers. First of all, as you're looking through the budgets that I'm going to go in detail in just a moment, we did some assumptions, Bob and I. Revenue, state aid, I might be a little optimistic. We're looking at state aid increasing 1% a year. Tax levy, as we all know now, the cap is not really 2%, but we use 2% in our calculations going forward. All other revenue items remain the same or at zero. Expenditures, salary increases at 2% for each year. Contractual costs, so these are the obligations that we have with many of our vendors, increase by 8% a year. We'll talk about that when I get to the slide. Benefits rise by 12% per year, so we're talking pension costs, workers' compensation. These are all higher rising costs, especially recently. No substantial staff cuts going forward, at least not in our budgets or information, and all programming remains stable. Then we have to look at the districts as individuals because there are some unique assumptions by district. First of all, for the 12-13 year that we're currently in, South Seneca exceeded the property tax cap. Those of you at our budget meetings may recall it was negative this year. Sometimes that happens, depending on the formula. We also are participating in a $100,000 capital project that will have an impact on our aid in future, in this case in a positive way. Romulus went out below the property tax for 2013. They have capital projects that they are in the midst of. I believe it has zero impact on the budget, at least that's the plan until it actually completes. We won't be able to put some fine-tuned numbers on there, but that is one of the unique assumptions. Those are revenue. Unique assumptions as it relates to expenditures. Well, South Seneca has TST BOCES costs. As the consultants pointed out, Romulus is with the Wayne Finger Lakes, who have their own set of costs associated with that BOCES. We have a health consortium in South Seneca, but it is managed by the TST BOCES. It has separate rates, separate increases that are managed by the consortium. So does the health consortium that's out of the Wayne Finger Lakes for Romulus, but different assumptions, different rates, different increases each year. So those are unique by district. Staff cuts for 12-13, and South Seneca did have them, as did Romulus. They are not in these 12-13 numbers that I'm going to show you in a moment, and I'll tell you why when I get there. Salary agreements, continuing with South Seneca, are at 2% or less. So that was those were the numbers that we had going forward into 12-13. Again, Romulus has the capital projects. There are expenditures that are related to that. They had staffing cuts through attrition, and their salary agreements were at 4% or less going into 12-13. Then overall, again, when we plan our budgets as individuals, things change. Same thing, or the potential is very possible going forward, especially when we're dealing with the state, the economy, with the federal government. And so we looked at what could occur that aren't in our assumptions. These are the kind of things that we would include in the contingency portion of our budget, such as mid-year a budget give-backs by the state of New York. It has happened. We hope it doesn't happen again, but it is a possibility. We have not included that in our numbers. The effect of prior year impacts on state aid. We're starting to get information from the state about things that we did 5 years ago. So that's not unusual either for them to come back later on and say, we've done some recalculating. There's some amount of building aid, for example, that might need to be repaid. Those budget contingencies that I talked about are not in here. Changes in federal grants. We're all hearing about the fiscal cliff. Well, many of the federal grants that come through the school districts are as part of that fiscal cliff and could be cut. That's not included in our numbers. Impact of capital projects, I've already mentioned. Further change in economy and stock market. Many of our expenditures are based on the economy. So our pension costs, for example, are based on the success of the stock market. And we've all seen that in our own portfolios. The New York State pension system is seeing it in theirs. When they don't do well, the individual districts chip in. Extreme inflation factors. Inflation is coming. How much? How soon? We don't know yet. We can't predict that one on any kind of quantifying basis. That's not in there. Projected staff and program cuts for 13-14. As we go forward, both Romulus and South Seneca would be making these decisions as part of their budget process. That's not in there. All right, so here is the slide. This is the information in a template form that came from the New York State Comptroller's Office. So we wanted to pick a third-party mechanism so that we could compare the numbers from both districts as equally as possible. What we've done is made the decision to look at our actual numbers. So the auditors from Romulus and the auditors from South Seneca gave us our actual numbers for the last 4 years. We put a few assumptions into the template, and then we project what those numbers might look like going forward. So what you might see on your own budget, let me see if I can get a pointer here, is what you're going to see up here as well. I don't know if you can see that. So revenue, I'm looking at the first line here for South Seneca. Revenue, if you see the next yellow bar, that's Romulus. This is the revenue that we're expecting for the current year, the next year, the year after, and the year after that, based on what we've gotten in the past. So all those assumptions that I talked about may or may not impact these. May impact it a lot, may impact it a little, may not impact it at all. So I wanted to put those caveats out there. Same thing with Romulus and their revenue going forward. This number is based on what we've gotten in the past. And again, working off actual numbers makes it a little bit easier for us to make these kind of comparisons. Next item is the expenditures. So these are the salaries, the curriculum, transportation, facility costs, pretty much everything it takes to run the district. These numbers are based on what our actual expenditures were in 11-12, and again, those are projected out using certain assumptions. So when I talked about contractual expenditures potentially increasing by 8%, those are in that number. Pension costs being increased by 12%, it's in those numbers. So those are things that we can project forward.